Namaste, epic hero. I wanted to share with you today, as I explore my ever-evolving relationship with spirituality and holistic wellness, opening up my practice, even though I'm still a Wiccan, to include all forms of spirituality and all forms of connecting to God. I have found useful these podcasts that also help me connect the dots between my major as a psychologist. Like, I'm majoring in psychology. I want to be a holistic wellness therapist, tying in the dots between the science and the academic world of psychology and the holistic spiritual side of wellness has been something that podcasts are really good for. I continued listening to the What in Politics podcast. That's not a spiritual podcast, it is a politics podcast. However, the lads that run it are very funny and comedic and caring, and they present a very non-toxic view of masculinity with their companionship and love for each other, and also when they share about the news, even though they can get overwhelmed with it, they often share it with a sense of humor that I find very helpful in processing. But aside from that, some of the podcasts that I've been listening to lately, one of them that's been on repeat is the Russell Brand Under the Skin podcast. I got hooked on Russell Brand after I saw an interview that he did with Mae Martin from the show Feel Good, which is a really, really cool show on Netflix about a queer person dealing with like gender identity and sexuality and addiction. And so when I watched their interview with Russell Brand actually on gender, I discovered that he had kind of left his career as a comedian and become a advocate for spirituality as a form of taking back control of your life after being an addict. That's kind of where he's coming at it from. Had been addicted to heroin and I think cocaine also. So he's coming at spirituality from that form of being healed by it and being really curious about all the other benefits of spirituality. So I love listening to him in a similar way. It's nice to listen to things that are important for me to be understanding of, with a comedic side to it, because and his comedy is also similar to the What in Politics people, that of a very silliness and just a playfulness instead of a sort of meanness or hatefulness that some comedians can come across as. So I really appreciate and it also with a high level of sincerity, which the other podcast has as well. When he interviews spiritual teachers, scientists, and shamans or healers, people working in the spiritual scene, or people that work with alternative medicine or alternative healing modalities, and he interviews them either just about their practice, or if they're scientists or something, about the science of their practice. He really interviews a lot of different people who have a lot of different ideas, very kind of outside the box ideas about maybe, his kind of through line is that we used to be an indigenous people, like all of us, before the Western world and the colonizers kind of took over. We used to be living in small communities with an understanding of spirituality, meaning something higher than ourselves. We revered and respected nature in the form of usually deities sometimes, and we revered and respected our elders as smaller communities, and we lived in line with nature and with each other, and we understood that everything that the cycles of life and the cycles of nature were sacred, and we looked after each other, and we understood medicine. But nowadays, we've been very disconnected from each other, and we worship the god of capitalism, usually in the Western world, and the higher corporations are in charge of most things in the United States. And so he's kind of exploring that idea of the different people that have different ideas about how maybe we can get back to that place, or closer to where we used to be. And you know, there's people with all different kinds of ideas, and I really respect Russell Brand for having this open-mindedness in order to hear everyone's opinions and also hit it without judgment, and just a realist search for the truth, and also his devotion to his practices. So while I've never been addicted to heroin or cocaine, I have had some issues with anxiety, as I've mentioned before, and also just like other addictive behaviors such as like sex or food, either eating or not eating, and what else was I thinking of just the other day? I don't know, I've just had some addictive tendencies such as those, and I'm coming to understand, as many recovering addicts do, that you have to look to something higher than yourself in order to overcome these destructive tendencies. Because when you understand there's a higher purpose, it can for some people it can really heal that need to escape self-obsession through substance, because you can escape it through spirituality. So there's so much to unpack there, but if you're somebody who really wants to kind of understand spirituality in a little bit more of like an analytical perspective, or just curiosity to hear what people are talking about out there about these kinds of questions, I would highly recommend his podcast. It's very nice to hear. And I also just love, like I said, he's very non-judgmental. It's not that he's either agreeing or not agreeing with any of the people that he interviews. He's just kind of listening and learning and taking what he can and leaving what he can't from his interviewees, and he kind of invites the audience to do the same. So it can definitely raise a lot of questions for me and things that I have wanted to look into further. One of my podcasts that I mentioned in the last video, Your Own Magic, also had a gut health specialist, which I'm very interested in because I have IBS right now, but I'm starting to be convinced that my IBS and my chronic pain can be symptoms largely reduced not through Western medicine, so through spiritual means, through changing the food that I eat and the lifestyle that I lead, the community that I keep, the spiritual practices that I have, meditation, yoga, etc. All of which can also enhance my usefulness as a spiritual person on this earth. So listening to those gut health specialists, it really opened my mind to a lot of the toxins that affect us, and studying psychology also opened my mind and understanding of the science behind a lot of the factors that control not only like gut health and IBS issues and anxiety and depression, but also ADHD and bipolar disorder and also cancer and heart failure, that some of the main leading causes of death in the United States are not caused by genetics or, anomalies, but are caused by oftentimes things such as stress and anxiety, which can sometimes be cured through spiritual practice or through mindfulness, through living in line with the earth, through living in line with your community, and through eating a healthy diet, or a diet that's healthy for your specific body. And those are all things that are not quick fixes. People in the West are used to a quick fix because that's the capitalistic way that will help them be more productive to the higher man in capital, but that's not the way to get healed. The capitalist solution to having any disorder is just pay more money, like a bunch of money, to the people that are the capitalists in the first place, and buy these drugs that will suppress the symptoms and not actually deal with the root issues that are often caused by the very capitalists that are selling you the money. I mean, that are selling you the medicine, like caused by them through means of inaccessibility to healthy foods that will fuel your body, through chronic stress because of overworking, through inaccessibility to healthy air and healthy water, especially for lower ethnic minorities and lower income households. So capital, like the god of capital, is basically fucking over a lot of people and then, reselling them medicines that just take care of the symptoms and don't actually deal with the root cause. So anyway, that's something I'm very, very passionate about, and that podcast by Russell Brand really digs into that and also reinvigorates my devotion to my own spiritual practices and reminds me every day why they're so important. Tonight I've actually been able to go to a sun ritual, which was so healing for me, and feeling reinvigorated again just through connecting online with some spiritual people and getting back into my practices. So listening to that podcast just reminds me why it's important to stick with spiritual practices and really keep them religiously. So very good for that kind of thing if you're looking for something like to feel like a community and to uplift you and to encourage you. Really personable guy, and I think he's a good resource. Another one I've been really liking recently, a little bit less on the comedic side, but still very down to earth and relatable, is this guy called, it's Kyle Kingsbury, the Kyle Kingsbury podcast. Similar thing in which he interviews spiritual teachers and alternative medicine shamans. He's a little bit more into plant medicine, whereas Russell Brand, as an ex-addict, is very but for himself, very anti-plant medicine. But Kyle Kingsbury is more on the side of being very interested and open to plant medicine within ritualistic settings. So he's more on that side of things, but he's still, I guess, a very down-to-earth guy. I really relate with him and his, he was I think a wrestler, maybe a boxer, but he's a very athletic kind of guy, I guess a real manly man, and I enjoy tapping into that energy and getting some, feeling some brotherhood there with like somebody who's a real manly man in the spiritual space, really kind of talking about how these things have helped him to be in his best, right? And also, whereas he's more of like a carnivore, whereas Russell is more of a plant-based, because he believes spiritually that's more in line with him. So these are just kind of different views on things, but really cool. I love getting all learning from everybody. And one might say that Russell's a little bit more on the side of looking how we can help the world, and Kyle may be looking a little bit more on how you can heal the individual, make them stronger. So those are just different kind of ways to think about things, but also Kyle is obviously helping the world by educating them on these ways in which they can heal themselves and maybe escape from the sort of capitalistic trap of thinking that productivity is the ultimate goal. The Kyle Kingsbury podcast, really beneficial for me. Some of these episodes from Russell Brand and from Kyle Kingsbury, some of the people that they interview, listening to the podcast themselves is medicine. I got introduced to Muji, who's a spiritual teacher, through Russell Brand, and he did guided meditation on one of his podcasts, and that was really healing for me. Kyle Kingsbury had a sound healer with hand pans on his podcast, and just listening to that was very healing for me. So sometimes just listening to these episodes, besides gaining wisdom on self-healing modalities, can also kind of be medicine themselves. So that was really, really cool. Trying to think. There've been a few that I've been into that are just like a one-off kind of things. There's a podcast called All My Relations. I've really been trying to understand and be more educated on Indigenous issues, just because as I become more spiritual, I become more and more aware just how messed up it is that we took away this land from the Indigenous people who were already doing these things, living in line with the land and living in line with their sacredness, and we just outlawed that for some reason, which is not only bad for them, although that's the most important part of it, it's also just really bad for us. Like, we should be allowed as people to, as anyone, as humans, to not be like covered up, like to wear less clothing, to move our bodies, worship and make loud noises, in worship and gather in nature without being policed because it's, private property or past city's curfew. Like, we should be able to go out in nature and perform these rituals and perform these things that we are meant to do in our bodies, that are in our genes, that are in our code, that are healing. But more important, and that heals all of us. We're not allowed to do those things, unfortunately. Like, some places you can get away with it, but it's fucked up the way that we're policed about those things. Even policed about what foods we grow sometimes, or land accessibility, just nature accessibility. We already have the science that nature heals, but some people cannot get access to nature, especially those Indigenous people who should have most access to it because it was theirs first. People that have access to nature are often really rich white people who inherited all this money that was built on the backs of slavery and homicide of Native people, and they collect all this. They inherit all this money and all this land, and they have access to all this wellness because of this land, and then maybe they don't realize it, but maybe they do, but the descendants of the people that they stole it from and that they enslaved in order to gain it do no longer have access to healthy food and healthy land for the most part because of what's been done to them. So that's really fucked up. So anyway, I want to learn more, but I want to learn more about the Indigenous practices, especially as I'm on this land. I think if I'm practicing spirituality, I should at least honor the spirituality that was practiced here before me, before my ancestors. So a podcast called All My Relations is one that I've been enjoying, hosted by some Native American young ladies who kind of interview elders from Native American traditions and lineages about issues that are going on right now or recently, things that you can kind of become more aware of what's going on. So that's been educational for sure, and they have a sense of humor and a lightheartedness about them, which makes some of the stuff a little bit easier to swallow also. What else? Those are my go-tos right now, to be honest with you. I also really enjoy this podcast. I haven't put out anything in a minute, but it's called, I think it's the Social Change Leaders podcast, or Unleashing Social Change, maybe it's called. I was a little frustrated a little while ago because I couldn't listen to a lot of the social justice movement because it was so angry and it was so full of all this really, really bitter energy, extremely draining, and I wanted to get involved, but I didn't understand how to without like burning out, right? And I also wondered why the social justice movement seemed to be run by like a lot of young people, like where were all the older people who got involved in this stuff in like the 70s, right? And so I soon found out that they oftentimes operate under a different kind of name. So sometimes you can find social change being the word used by older people who have been at this for a long time. I wanted to gain the wisdom of people who have been at this for a long time on how to make effective social change and not just get mad about it on Twitter. You know, how to make effective social change and how to provide space and communities to recharge each other and to build community around making constructive social change. So the Social Change Leaders podcast was really great because the lady who's running it is like 50 plus, and people that she's interviewing are too, and they're mostly social workers, and doing some really cool stuff that I'm definitely very interested in, because I really sometimes don't know whether in order to make social change if I should be working inside the system or outside the system. But as a sort of a look at sort of sustainably working inside the system, that's a good resource to have. And they seem sort of aware of spirituality also, even though she doesn't like subscribe to any specific spirituality. She sort of sees maybe just because she's older, she sort of sees the value in it as a concept and as a way to sort of garner and foster community and healing. Yeah. To be honest with you, I've kind of been missing like a good witchy or queer podcast. All the ones that I find tend to be either really bitter, which is an energy I just can't deal with right now. I'm not saying anybody shouldn't be, but like the really sort of like drama, like who's canceled this week stuff, I don't think that's where my energy used to be going right now. So I kind of can't deal with that, and a lot of that kind of energy feels very privileged also, like, oh, James Charles was canceled this week, but like I don't think we should be giving all this energy and time in order to talking about that for half an hour. Like, I don't believe canceling as a spiritual person. I believe that all people are, would have done the same thing as anybody else within their certain situation. I believe we should be focusing on solutions that make the most impact. And other than that, kindness within our communities. So unfortunately, a lot of the queer podcasts that I've been finding, or the witchy podcasts, have been very bitter and angry, and I want to find some that are a little bit more uplifting. I already have my Your Own Magic and my spiritual ones that I was mentioning. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel like there's another one that I'm not thinking of. I don't know. Those have been the ones that I've really, really been vibing with recently, and I would like to share with you in case they bless you, because it can be hard to find a good podcast. And please share with me in the comments if you have more podcasts along these alleys that I think I might be interested in. And yeah, I think that's all. I haven't had a lot to say recently, but I'm going to be publishing a couple of my videos that I filmed and didn't publish yet soon. To be honest with you, I think I've been a little bit afraid to post stuff because I used to be very atheistic, and now as I'm moving into a more spiritual sort of lifestyle modality, I wondered if some of my previous viewers would be frustrated by that, but because I remember when I left Christianity, I was really against anything spiritual, so I completely understand that, and it's totally fine. But that's where I am now, so I need to be sharing my authenticity and myself, you know what I mean? So anyway, thank you for listening. I love you so much. And also, happy Sun in Aquarius. And I hope that you are excited about the days getting brighter and the sun coming back. Something very beautiful is happening, and I think it's really amazing that the sun's coming back as I don't know, as we're potentially moving out of pandemic territory and into a new presidential reign. I know that none of this stuff, the pandemic coming to a close and the presidential transfer, I know none of this stuff is perfect, and I know a lot of it still serves the systems that be. So we have to be focusing a lot of our energy on building up our own community and not putting as much attention into the government at large and letting them distract us. But I still think it's kind of cool that the sun's coming out right now. I think that the sun's coming out right now, and maybe you've been feeling it too, but there's been a lot of heaviness, not just with the news, but involving that, you know. There was a lot of division with Trump and the pandemic, and I think that while that was really frustrating, it's been a shadow and a thing, and a test and a trial that is helping us to realize that separating ourselves into binaries, like us versus them, is not helpful, because all that does is stop us from working together to making the world a better place. So yeah, anyway, I think there's an awakening happening, and I'm glad to be here with you chatting, and excited to be part of it. Okay. Anyway, until I see you again, always remember, we are epic heroes today and every day of our lives. I'll see you in the next video.